Hi. In this session, we are going to discuss about Web Dynpro ABAP. So, as a part of the session, we'll see about what is SAP Web Dynpro ABAP and why do we have another UI technology to build web-based application, its features and how it works, and finally we'll see about how to create a simple Hello World application using this Web Dynpro ABAP technology. So going forward, discussing about the version history of Web Dynpro ABAP, we'll see about what is SAP Web Dynpro. So SAP Web Dynpro is a SAP NetWeaver programming model in order to develop web-based application with SAP. This SAP Web Dynpro programming model is available in Java as well as in ABAP. And now when we think about why do we have another UI technology in order to create a web-based application. So initially SAP provides SAP GUI in order to access the data, functionalities or business processes within the SAP system. And in this scenario, even the end users need some basic knowledge to work on the SAP GUI. So in order to make the user interface simpler and attractive for the end user, SAP has developed Web Dynpro, using which it is possible to develop web-based applications within SAP development environment. So basically, when we are investing in a UI today, we must be sure that it will run on tomorrow's technology. So if we build a UI framework today, and if we want to be sure that it can take advantage of tomorrow's technology, Web Dynpro proves to provide such UI build where it can withstand any technology promotion. Now we'll see about the version evolution in Web Dynpro ABAP. So initially we had this SAP GUI which provides all business process functionalities. Then we had IDS technology, which is a SAP GUI for HTML, and then IDS business server pages, JSP and HTMLB, and HTMLB for BSP. Then we had this Web Dynpro Java and Web Dynpro ABAP. So in this whole session, we will be discussing about Web Dynpro ABAP and how to build web-based applications using this Web Dynpro ABAP. So going forward, we'll see about the features offered by SAP Web Dynpro ABAP. As we know, SAP Web Dynpro application can be developed within Java environment as well as within ABAP environment. And this is integrated with the SAP development workbench and also can be accessed using SAT transaction in SAP GUI. Thus, as a part of introduction of Web Dynpro technology, SAT is enhanced in order to be compatible with Web Dynpro technology and enable the user to build web application using Web Dynpro from SAT. Thus, SAP NetWeaver provides the development and runtime environment for the Web Dynpro ABAP applications. So this delivers an enterprise quality-based web development environment. And also, Web Dynpro ABAP makes sure that it keeps up with the modularization concept, that is, clear separation between the business logic and the UI logic. And also it is built upon the MVC architecture, which consists of controller, context and view concepts. So it ensures that there is a structured design process in web development. In controller approach, this MVC design splits the responsibility of software components in two ways. One is functional responsibilities or business tasks that each component should fulfill, and the other is the message or the command that each component should respond on. So here, model represents the information and the business data from the database, whereas the viewer is responsible for the representation of the data in the browser. And this controller, which lies between the view and the model, formats the model data to be displayed in the view, processes the user entries made by the user, and returns them to the model. Thus, a Web Dynpro component consists of different types of controllers, context nodes, and view. Controllers in a Web Dynpro component are to provide functionality of a controller in MVC architecture. Thus, what it does is, it receives the user action from the user interface. For example, if user have clicked some button or user have entered some input and trying to save the business data. So whatever user action is performed, this controller is responsible for taking care of that particular action. And context within the Web Dynpro component represents the model of the MVC architecture. At runtime, this holds the required business content for a specific controller. And within the view controller, it is possible to design the layout. That is, this layout will consist of whatever element is required to be presented to the user. For example, a page which consists of some open input fields, some buttons to save the data, to cancel the data, to edit the record for providing some value into it. So all these sort of elements is designed in the view. And we can say like SAP Web Dynpro framework is an advanced tool and it supports declarative approach for the development of SAP Web Dynpro components. Basically, declarative programming paradigm enables the developer to be free from programming control flow within the application and to describe what the application should accomplish rather than how to accomplish. Of course, the developer needs to write code for tasks which can't be performed with declarative programming. For example, to execute some business logic that is called to BAPI, which may involve fetching and processing data from the database, which can only be done at the backend SAP system. So, put it in this way, that is, for the development of a context node within a specific controller of the SAP Web Dynpro component, the user have to define the metadata of the context node. So what will happen is, the required code will get generated automatically by the framework. Similarly, the user interface layout design is also created within the view controller using the available UI elements. So here, the developer can set the properties of these UI elements. As a result, the SAP Web Dynpro framework takes care of the data flow between the context and the UI elements without writing any code. Thus, we can always say like with this declarative approach, the lot of UI design and the functionality is achieved with minimum programming effort. Another benefit of following this declarative approach in the development of UI design within the SAP Web Dynpro component is that there is no need for the developers to have the knowledge of HTML and JavaScript. So SAP Web Dynpro framework takes care of the generation of the required HTML and JavaScript code based upon the declarations done by the developer within the view layout design. For example, if we are designing the view layout with some buttons, with some input fields, with some checkboxes, and for these UI elements are taken care by the framework itself. And also we can say like, as most of the code is generated by the framework based upon the declarations done by the developer, the web-based application developed on this SAP Web Dynpro ABAP becomes more independent of the rendering engine. Thus, the applications developed using SAP Web Dynpro ABAP can be integrated into iViews with an enterprise portal, SAP NetWeaver Business Client, etc. Not only this, as the SAP Web Dynpro components are independent of rendering engines, the developers need not be worried about the release of new rendering engines. Components are more of reusable and better maintainability. We'll now go ahead and see about how this process flow happens in Web Dynpro component development. So we do have this Web Dynpro tools which are provided in SCIT transaction code, where we'll build the metadata, we'll create the metadata, and this in turn will, using the generator, will generate some code, whereas for these metadata, for the UI elements, whatever we create, some code will get generated automatically using this generator. And whenever some custom code or custom logic is required, so in that case, like for example calling a BAPI or some RFC, some function module, in order to handle some data fetch, data save. So in those cases, as per the requirement, as per the custom logic which is demanded, we can put the custom code into this auto-generated code. And this Web Dynpro at runtime, it can be loaded in different rendering engine. So rendering engine here is nothing but the platform or the window which provides the path for the access of Web Dynpro web-based application. That is, for example, the web-based application which is built using Web Dynpro can be accessed using the rendering engine HTTP browser, that is normal HTTP browser, or using iView and Enterprise Portal, or using the SAP NetWeaver Business Client. And also one more point that we have to remember is Web Dynpro ABAP is independent of the rendering engines. So even if some new rendering engines are promoted, Web Dynpro ABAP, whichever web-based application built using this technology, can be accessed using any sort of rendering engine. So that is one sort of advantage we can say by using. So we'll now log into the system and we'll see like how to create a simple Hello World application using Web Dynpro ABAP. So the transaction code that we have to access for building this web-based application using Web Dynpro ABAP is SC80. And here just select Web Dynpro component interface and provide some Z name for the component that we are going to create. So we'll have it as ZDemo, create this object, and here the system will prompt for some details, that is the description. We can give it as demo hello world, and it will ask for the window name and the view name. So basically, to create a web-based application using this Web Dynpro ABAP, the component is the key factor and the main element, where it will hold various elements, that is window, view, and different controllers, context. So all these individual elements, like in order to handle the business process, in order to handle the business data, the business process flow, so all these are handled, all these elements are embedded into the larger unit, which is nothing but a component. So here when we talk about the window is the one which is used to define the visual flow logic of the web page, and a window can hold one view or any number of views. So next, when we talk about the view is the one which will display the business data to the user with some UI elements, like for example the business content, that is the data whichever is required for that business, and also the UI elements, that is some buttons in order to handle or in order to work with that business data. So this is one sort of example to understand about view. View is the one which will provide the business content to the user in user readable format. So here we can provide our own window name and view name, and then we can create this component. So save it in local object. Once this component is created, we can able to see various elements also got created under this component. So here we can see like it has something called component controller, component interface, views and windows. So this views and windows we have discussed already, like windows will control the visual flow of the web page, whereas view is the one which shows the business content to the user. And then we have this controller, where controller is responsible for handling the user input, user action on the UI. Like if they have clicked some button, or if they have feeded some input and pressed enter. So based upon the user action, what response should be provided and where this response have to be handled. So all these things are processed by the controller. So we'll see about this component controller, component interface, all these concepts in detail later. Activate this UI component that we have created, which will activate all the elements that were created, that is the controller, view, window, and all these things. Now to create a simple hello world text in a web page, we'll see how to, what are all the steps involved. So just double click on the view controller, where we will be provided with a screen where we'll have a list of UI elements. So this layout is the area where we will design this view. That is how this data have to be presented to the user and what all elements we want in that web page. So all these things we'll design in this layout tab. So once you double click on the view controller, you will be provided only with this property of the UI elements. So like in order to edit it and in order to embed some UI element into this view, just click on edit, where you will get the list of UI elements that are available. So from here you can drag and drop whatever UI element you want in this particular view to be shown to the user, or you can also right click here and insert the element. So all these UI elements will have their own purpose and their own behavior. And for this hello world example, we'll just use a text view. We'll provide the ID as text view and the type, which determines what action this particular UI element will perform. That is, the behavior of this UI element is determined by this type. So here we will select text view and proceed further. So in this place, whatever fields we want to provide some input, that is whichever field is mandatory to get some input, those will be shown in red color. So here under this text, we will provide the text that is to be displayed in the UI application. We'll give it as hello world. So once the text is provided, save it and activate the view controller. So here you can able to see that the text view, how it gets displayed. So let us activate this view controller. Now the view is ready, that is the content which is to be shown in the UI is ready and web page is ready. Now we have to create this web page, that is the front end, which is going to the web page which is going to show this view content to the user. So in order to do that, we have to create the Web Dynpro application. So for that, just right click on the component where you will get and create Web Dynpro application. So here provide a description for this Web Dynpro application. We'll give it as hello world. Press enter. So this is where we can see the Web Dynpro application and also the URL. So let us save it in local object. Once you save it, you will able to get this element, that is this entry Web Dynpro applications under your Web Dynpro component. So now we'll test this Web Dynpro application, which will launch the web page and will show this hello world content. So once you click on test, it will launch this web page and will show this content, whatever we gave, whatever we built in the view. So we are done with creating a simple Web Dynpro component to show the hello world text in it. We'll just try to recollect what all we have done. Like initially in SEIT we created this Web Dynpro component, and when creating this Web Dynpro component, the system will prompt a pop-up where we can provide our own window name and view name. So as discussed, component is the larger unit which will comprises of all the sub-elements in order to work with the web application. So like in order to work with the web application, we need the business data, we need some flow logic, and we need some UI which should show the business content. So here comes this model view controller approach, like model holding the business content, view which shows the business data, and a controller which deals with the flow logic, like in order to process the data. So once you create this component, it will come up with the component controller, component interface, view, and window. Window, we have seen, it will deal with the visual flow of the web page, and it may consist of a single view or multiple views. View, it is the one which deals with the data that is presented to the user, and also it consists of some set of UI elements which you can use to build your view, that is to build your web application. So we have once done with the component creation, activated the component, and then we just double clicked on the view controller where we used the text view UI element, where in that case whichever field is mandatory for the user to provide some input, it will be shown in red. And in this case we have provided the hello world text in the text view UI element. Once it is done, we have activated this view controller, and now the content to be shown is ready, whereas we need a web page, and for that we created this Web Dynpro applications, and this will come up with a URL which it will launch in order to show this business content whatever we built in the view. So with this we'll end with this session, and we will continue in the next session about the further Web Dynpro concepts, where we can go into deeper about in order to build a web-based application, and also we'll see about FPM. So to get more insights on Web Dynpro ABAP, do follow our space, and also you can contact us using the email ID provided, SAP Online.